All right. Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you are. Tonight we start a new venture, and we're going to, let me just get right on the screen here so we can have a little focus. We are going to start Sefer Mishle tonight, in English, the book of Proverbs. And as is true at the beginning of every venture, we say a little tefillah, which is B'Shem Hashem Na'aseh V'Natzliach. With Hashem's help, we're going to be successful. We're going to grow together. We're going to learn more about this book. And there's a lot to talk about, actually. I'm going to leave the screen share up for just a minute because I'm going to be relying on it quite a bit tonight. I want you, if you have any preconceived notions of what Sefer Mishle is, the book of Proverbs, I want you to throw it out the window. It's the way you approach any book. I've said many times over the years that when you want to look at a pasuk in Tanakh, just one random pasuk, you already have certain preconceived ideas of what it might mean. You might know the English, you may know a bit of the Midrash, but when you really want to focus on that pasuk or that chapter, that parak, put away everything you already know and forget about it, and just try to focus if it's brand new. So whether you've learned Mishle yet or not, or you know what it's about, put it off to the side. And what we're going to do in order to start this, we're going to talk a little bit, just for a couple of minutes, about the author of what is probably at least most, if not all, of Mishle, and that is Shlomo HaMelech. In order to understand a little bit about Shlomo HaMelech, we're going to take a look just for a couple psukim. I have it only in English here, in Hebrew. But I want to review the story of what happens in Sefer Melachim. When Hashem comes to Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, and he gives him a choice, and he says, look, you can have, in a dream, and he gives him a choice between riches and wisdom. And in his dream, you'll see what it says here. Shlomo HaMelech asks for a listening heart, in order to judge the people, lavin ben tov lara, in order to distinguish between good and bad. Because look, God, you know these Jews. There's a lot of stuff that we have to deal with here, and I need as much wisdom and knowledge as possible. And it was good in the eyes of God because Shlomo asked for this. What's this? Again, it's wisdom. The Shlomo has it's not during the daytime. Imagine God comes to you in the daytime and says, listen, here's your choice. You can choose to have all the riches in the world, or I can give you the most wonderful brain on earth and the most wise of all people. Well, you're going to say, well, look, I know what I really, maybe I want the money, but the tachlis is that the wisdom, the knowledge is really much more important, and you might choose that. But when you're in your dream, where you're allowed to do whichever you want, it's your subconscious, then you might have chosen the money. And yet Shlomo HaMelech in his dream chooses wisdom. And that imprints who he becomes. And God grants him both wisdom and riches, as we know from learning in Sefer Melachim. We also know that he wrote 3 books in Tanakh. One is Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which is the most personal. I'll just explain that in a moment. Mishle, the book of Proverbs that we're about to learn, and the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. It's just a funny name in English to me. I don't know, it sounds strange. Also, another book which has a lot of depth to it. And as a matter of fact, the Gemara tells us that when Shlomo HaMelech wrote the book of Kohelet, Bikshu lignoz oto, they wanted to bury it because it's very depressing. It's a very big of downer. Havel havalim amar Kohelet. Everything's no good. Everything's vanity. Everything's vain. That's not tonight's topic, but I want to point out to you that Kohelet starts off Divrei Kohelet ben David. These are the words of Kohelet, which is another name for David, King David, of Shlomo, the son of David. Mishle starts with Mishle ben David, that these are the parables of the son of David. And Shir HaShirim starts off Shir HaShim Asher Shlomo. It's the only one of the 3 books he mentions his own name at the beginning, as opposed to Ben David. The general idea is that both Mishle and Kohelet are books of ethical teachings, Musar, also teaching us how to act in our lives, and that he's saying is part of a tradition he's passing along. Shir HaShirim is a love story. It's a love story between man and God. It's written as a love story between man and woman, but by personification, it is the idea of or actually anthropomorphism, the love story between man and God. And that's a very personal thing. And Shlomo puts his own personal name on it because that's how we relate to Hashem on our own level. So let's talk a little bit about, tonight's really going to be an overview of what the book is, a little bit of background, and also a bunch of terms that we're going to talk about. And even if you don't remember them, they're going to come up so many times that it'll become second nature to you. It's a book of parables. By the way, you're hearing my what used to be my youngest granddaughter until a few days ago. Baruch Hashem, we got a new granddaughter in the background. She came to visit for a few. I think she wants to teach the class, so that's pretty cool. Probably knows a lot more than I do. Parables, it's a book of metaphors, moral instruction. In general, that's what it's about. But you would think, imagine for a moment, I'm going to write a book. There's no book yet about Jewish law. So instead of giving a book of Jewish law, I write in a roundabout way what the rules and regulations are. So you know, kind of intuit what it is and feel what it is. And just tell me, tachlis, what it is I'm supposed to do. It's interesting when I taught girls Gemara, when I taught guys Gemara in high school, I saw a radical difference. The guys got into it, the arguments of the Gemara. The girls, after the first few classes, always would say, just tell me what to do. Why do we need to know all these arguments? So again, why teach literally in tongues? Why work in a roundabout way? Just say what's right and say what's wrong. Don't do this. Don't do this. Here's how you're supposed to act. You have a couple of chapters, you're done. You don't need 31 or so chapters. The answer really lies in the fact of what the nature is of the human being. It's not enough to speak in abstract logic, and you need to speak to the heart, to the mind as well. One moment. And when you're trying, just assume for a moment, you're going to try to talk to your child or to your neighbor or to your spouse or someone that you're friendly with, and you want to try and tell them something. Maybe they're not doing something right or how to do something better. You know, there's two types of people in the world. The ones that go like that, head on, and just tell you what they want to tell you. And the others that the kind of a roundabout way or maybe a parable. We saw that David HaMelech did something wrong, and along comes his prophet Natan HaNavi and tells him the whole parable about a sheep and someone who stole a sheep, and just tell you straight out. Again, people are more apt to listen when it's a story, when it's a parable, when you're speaking to their heart and from the heart to the head. And that's why Mishle uses a lot of poetic imagery, comparisons, and there are actually many riddles within Mishle, which enables a person's brain also to kick in the wisdom part of this. And we're going to talk about that as well. I want to look at the first 7 psukim. We're going to read it and translate in no depth whatsoever, just to get a feel for the beginning of Sefer Mishle, what it looks like. Make it a drop smaller. Okay. Again, I'm going to read, translate, but these terms you're going to hear, many terms. We're going to talk about those tonight, what they mean. Mishle Shlomo ben David. By the way, you might think also that the beginning of the book is because here's my introduction, first few psukim, and then boom, 31 chapters of all kinds of parables and similes and metaphors. No, you got a long time till you get to all the meat of the book, and that's part of what we're going to do tonight. Take a little overview of how it's structured. Mishle Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael. These are the proverbs of Shlomo, the son of David, king of Israel. Ladat chokhmah umusar, for learning wisdom and discipline. Musar also can be ethics. Lahavin imrei vina, to understand words of discernment. Now, even in English, it sounds stilted. Like, what does that mean? Lakachat musar haskel. Well, he just mentioned musar, discipline or ethics. Now it's saying, in order to acquire musar haskel, discipline for success. I don't think I would translate that. Tzedek u'mishpat u'mesharim, righteousness, justice, equity. Latet liftaim orma, endow the simple with shrewdness, the nar dat umzima, and the young with knowledge and foresight. Yishma chacham v'yosef lekach, a person who's wise will learn to be adroit. What does that mean? They'll learn from these words, and they will add their own lessons from it. V'navon tachtolot yikneh, and someone who is someone who is I guess I jumped the wrong line here. So the first one is the wise will hear and gain wisdom. There you go. And the discerning will be more adroit. V'navon tachtolot yikneh. Lahavin mashal umlitza, to understand proverbs and epigrams. We'll see what that means really in normal language. Divrei chachamim, the words of the wise, v'chidotam, and their riddles. Yirat Hashem reshit da'at, the beginning of knowledge, or fear of Hashem is the beginning of knowledge. Chochma umusar evilim bazu. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. Now, there is in these 7 psukim there are many terms that will lay the groundwork for this upcoming book. Lahavdil, which is an expression we use to say we don't want to compare, but we're going to compare. This is the paper you open up when you get your product from IKEA. IKEA shows the pictures of all the little things, right? And you first start, make sure you have these screws, and you have these nuts, and you have these washers, and you have this wood, and you have these dowels. And okay, now what? Now what are you going to do with it? You have to first understand what each piece is and where it's going to go, and we're going to follow an instruction manual. So what this is doing right now is setting us up. So we're going to talk about some of these terms just first in English, and we'll look at the Hebrew shortly. What does it mean to develop discernment? What does that mean? It's more than just to distinguish between right and wrong. It's more than just the theoretical. There are certain things that are absolutely black and white. You don't beat somebody up, you don't steal, you don't rob, you don't cheat, you don't lie. But there are other things that are a gray area. And in order to understand, is it in the black or is it in the white? Or are we supposed to do some kind of a combination? That's a form of discernment. Again, we're going to talk about these terms in depth. I'm going to just kind of run through a few of them in English. What's moral discipline? Musar Haskel. It's speaking more to the human nature, the instincts of human nature, and how to corral them, how to make sure they follow an ethical path in life, to help the young gain subtlety and maturity. Again, these are terms we saw. Simple throughout Sefer Mishle does not mean unintelligent. It means inexperienced. And again, to provide for the depth for the wise means that someone may say, I have a lot of knowledge, but there's even more to learn. What is this? Again, I ran through this. I'm going to go back slowly to the terms in a moment. It gives you a feel for like, wait, this book really is for everybody. It's for people who have a lot of knowledge. It's for people who have no knowledge. It's for people who are fools and simpletons and wise. And there's something here for everybody. So let's take a look at some of these terms. Okay. This is the English translation for some of these things. We'll talk about it a little bit in depth in a moment. Chokhmah is wisdom, and all these terms either appear in the first few psukim or will show up in the next few psukim, which we're not going to look at tonight. Chokhmah is wisdom. Musar is ethical teachings. Binah is discernment. And I know I keep repeating myself, but when we get to another slide in a moment, we'll look a little bit more in depth. Musar Haskel is wise discipline. We're going to see what's the difference between Musar and Musar Haskel. Peti or Ksil, a simpleton or a scoffer. Orma is shrewdness. The first appearance of that is when we see the beginning of Perek Gimel in Breshit. It says the Nachash was the Nachash was the most shrewd of all animals. Evil is a skeptic. It's the difference between a skeptic and a simpleton or a scoffer. A scoffer says, please, the rabbis make all this stuff up. Skeptic could say, maybe, I don't know, I'm not so sure yet. So let's talk about some of these other terms that will appear before we take an overview of the book itself. What is Bina? I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to say, let's add to this. The ability, it's understanding. Oh, great. Okay, you said 2 + 2 is 4. Now I understand 2 + 2 is 4. Is that understanding, or is that just acquisition of knowledge? If I say that I'd learned that if I'm driving, I come to a red light, I have to stop, that's understanding, or is that chokhmah? Is that wisdom? So what's bina? It doesn't say it here. It's lahavin davar mitoch davar, to understand something based on already knowledge that you have. That, for example, if someone says, "So, how's your dad doing?" And I say, "Well, my mom's doing great," you understand something is wrong with the father, right? How was your day? It was okay. Just in the inflection, you already know to understand these subtle distinctions. By the way, I don't mean this, God forbid, as a slam to anybody, but this is one of the things that when someone's on the retzef, when they're on the spectrum, depending how far high functioning or low functioning, it affects. This is an area that is affected in that, where they're unable to take social cues and understand certain things. Another term that's going to come up a lot is tzedek. We know that word tzedek is like the word tzedakah, tzodek. We say, you are correct. That's not tzodek. It was ethically correct, based on both divine command and human intuition. Example, we've talked about this in other scenarios, in other classes. You find something that you definitely do not have to return because it's quite obvious that the owner gave up hope, but you know whose it is. So the right thing to do is to return it still, even though you don't have an official mitzvah to do it. When you do, you get the mitzvah of returning it. Justice is mishpat, applying fairness with reason, grounded in clear principles. What does that mean? Again, all these terms we're going to see throughout the Sefer that are going to be so clear once we actually look at them in Psukim. Two people can ask me the exact same question, and I can give two different answers. Why? Isn't the halacha the halacha? The answer is yes, it's the halacha, but it also applies differently to different people depending on their circumstances. Someone may say, "Am I allowed to eat on Tisha B'Av?" I say, "No. Why would you be allowed to eat on Tisha B'Av?" Another person could say, "Am I allowed to?" I'll say, "Absolutely, you're not allowed to fast." They may have an eating disorder, may have some other problem, may have a sugar issue, whatever, and it's dangerous them to fast. They're not allowed to fast. That's a form of mishpat as well, not just talking about judgment as far as a court case. Mesharim is, again, similar to tzedek, where you're doing something right, even though there's no official rule one way or the other. You choose goodness out of integrity, and that falls in the category of what's called, there's a pasuk, more than one, vasita yashar v'hatov. Do what is right and upstanding. Let me see if I need this one yet. Okay, let me come back to this one and talk about that in a second. Second. Let me take it off screen share for a minute. My notes. Okay. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, understands, because he was the wisest of all people, something that unfortunately many educators do not grasp. And that is, not everyone learns the same way. Unfortunately, the way that most educational systems work, and it's just the nature of the beast, you have 25, 30 kids in a classroom, guaranteed they don't all learn the same way. Guaranteed that a percentage do, and a percentage will not be able to be visual learners. Some will be auditory, some will be, they have to write it down, some will have to be, whatever it might be. Everyone learns their own way. And as a classroom teacher, one of the tricks is trying to figure out with each child how they learn best, and making sure you can try to tailor the way that the information is being transmitted to that child. But it's not easy at all. There's also something called differential teaching. Shlomo HaMelech understood this, so that something that may not speak to you may speak to me, and vice versa. Something like say, like, okay, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to show you're going to try and tell me something based on a gematria and based on a midrash, pliya, blah blah blah. I don't want to hear it. It's not for me. And someone's like, eat it up, please. Just tell me, give me more. So therefore, Shlomo HaMelech has within Mishle a whole series of different educational tools. And the good thing about this as well is not just that we're going to learn about what these are, but and we'll see them as we move through the book, but also you can use these yourself when you're trying to explain something to somebody. You might want to give somebody paint a little story for somebody that they'll go like, oh man, I never looked at it that way. So let's go. These are words that are used throughout the book. We saw a couple of them already in the first few psukim. A mashal. Mashal is basically a parable. you talk about, especially this time of year. You go there's an old Jew living in a forest, and the king and the old house, and there's always a king because it's representative of God. All kinds of things. I'll give you one example. Actually, let me go through these. I'll give you an example of a different one. Melitza is a proverb. You'll notice it doesn't. The book is called Mishle, which means parables. In English, we say proverbs, but they're somewhat interchangeable in English. They have slight differences in connotation of what they will be as we go through the book. It's a melitza is a short, memorable saying with layers of meaning. It's a pithy statement. You'll see that many of the statements in Mishle are very short. You're going to be surprised as we go through Sefer Mishle how many psukim you already know, because they're quoted a lot. They're quoted in so many different places, but they're out of context. Spoiler alert, the last part of the last chapter of Mishle is Eshet Chayil, this thing we sing, the poem we sing on Friday night. That's straight out of Mishle. It's the end. Words of the wise, Divrei Chachamim, they're insights that come with metaphor and an explanation. For example, in Sefer Yeshayahu, he talks about the vineyard. The vineyard is where a person says he walks by and he sees it's overgrown with thistles and thorns and a little bit of wringing of the hands and what's going to happen. And it's not about an actual vineyard. It's about teaching a person that if you allow a situation to get out of hand, you're never going to be able to fix it, and you're going to be and it's going to be beyond your capacity to fix. Riddles. There are actually riddles, chidot, within Sefer Mishle. And these are the most, as it says here, the most complex form, that they're mysteries buried within the riddle. You have to figure out the riddle to understand what the mystery really is trying to tell us. The eagle and the vine, I'm not going to get into what they were right now, but if you want, you can look up Yechezkel chapter 17. These are some of the approaches. I'll give you an example, and it can fit almost into a couple of these. I used this story many years ago, maybe my very first Shabbat Shuvah here. I don't remember. By the way, I'll be sending out a post about Shabbat Shuvah Drasha. I'll give you the title already. It's called Human Being and Not Human Doing. You have to figure out what it is. But I think I told this following story or parable in my first year here. Story is about a man who becomes very wealthy, and he wants to build a magnificent building that should be for Torah education. It should be for whatever it's going to be. It's going to be magnificent and beautiful. And they're building it for years and years. And he has one stipulation, that at the end of the building of this edifice, he wants to be lifted by a crane to put a star on top of the building. That should be the crowning moment of the building's indoctrination being used, the beginning of the Chanukat Habayit. Comes the day, the building's there, everyone in the city is present, all the noblemen are there, and this rich man is being lifted up on a crane, and he puts this star on top, and as he's about to do it, he falls. He falls down to the ground. The star breaks, and he's very upset. He says, everything I have built has been destroyed. This is terrible. And people say to him, no, all that has happened is you've fallen. What you've built is still there. And that's true with our lives. We mess up. We do averot. We do things that are wrong. But what we have built is still there. That doesn't erase the mitzvot we've done. It's not like Hashem says, okay, I'm going to take this averah, and now it cancels out the mitzvah that happened that way. It doesn't work that way. We've talked about that many times over the years. So this is the type of mashal or parable story that will show up in Mishle. That's not in Mishle. But each level of one of these that you're looking at on your screen right now kind of pulls the reader a little bit deeper, engages the person. It almost asks for reflection. One of the things that we will see is that you can't just read, when we get to all the mishalim, all the parables, you can't just read it and move on. You have to understand what Shlomo is trying to tell us. Remember, this is not written by me or by you. This is written by the smartest person who ever lived. And we're going to learn also more meanings behind some of these expressions. So what is this book? How is it laid out? What's it made up of? So first of all, like I said, I want you to rid yourself of the idea that as soon as we begin this book, there's going to be all these parables. It doesn't work that way. For the most part, there's a beginning of the book from first 9 chapters that we were going to go through um, that are not an introduction. I'll call it an introduction, but it's not really an introduction. Then there's this central part of the book, basically chapters 10 to 29, which have all the Mishalim, the Chidot, the Melitzot, the parable, everything we've been talking about. And the last 2 chapters, the question is who exactly is the author, but I'm not going to get there yet. Maybe Shlomo HaMelech did not write those last 2. There's a difference of opinion. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what is this introductory section really telling us? Just based on those first few psukim, and then what's going to come up after this, is that absolutely everyone can gain from this book. If I take a book off my bookshelf right now, that's a book of philosophy, Jewish philosophy, something the Ikarim of Rabbi Yosef Albo, one of the first philosophical books, or take Emunot V'Deot of the Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon. For some people, it might be fascinating, and other people, you say, like, just really, I'd rather watch paint peel off a wall. It's not going to talk, doesn't speak to everyone. And we understand from this, the introduction of the Sefer itself. I'm not talking about mine, I'm talking the Sefer itself, and the book itself, that everyone can gain wisdom. Anybody can gain from this. Chokhmah is more than just mental activity. If mental activity meant chokhmah or wisdom, that would mean when I'm thinking about what I'll eat for lunch or what I want to do tomorrow, that's chokhmah. That's not. That's just my mind working on processing information. It's a skill. It's applied knowledge. I have knowledge which says that if it is cold outside, then I should wear a coat. That's knowledge. It's information. When I take the coat and put it on and I go outside because it's cold, when it's cold, that's chokhmah. It's basic, but that's still a form of wisdom. That it's also, if you learn a parak in Mishnayot, you say, wait a minute, you know what? This sounds very similar to something I did over there like 2 months ago. And you go look it up and say, wait, I can compare these 2 things and see why they're different and where they're the same. Again, taking knowledge and comparing them and using that, it's applying the knowledge to become chokhmah. That's also why in Parak Lamed Aleph, in chapter 31, Sefer Shemot, I think it's 31, I might be wrong, that the artisans and the craftsmen who built, starting with, my mind just went blank. Betzalel ben Uri ben Chul Yehuda. He is the artisan. They're known. All those people were known to have. He was known to have chokhmah, and it also talks about the women who were the weavers were women of chokhmah. Again, I may know that a thread and a needle can go together and do something, and they can connect material, or they can make a pattern in a piece of material. That's knowledge. But doing it and knowing how to do it is chokhmah. The purpose of this book is to help us develop a practical set of skills to live in Hashem's world. What's the purpose of learning all these things? What's the purpose of this wisdom and the Mishle? What's the goal? It's not just to teach us how to be good people. That is one of the goals, but it's our connection to Hashem. Sefer Kohelet that he wrote, same thing. Sefer Shir HaShirim, same thing. That's the goal of Shlomo HaMelech, making a better connection with God. And just to say, God is great, you got to love God, and you got to serve Hashem, and we have to be in fear and in awe, and we have to do all the mitzvot and have proper intention with it. That's great, but it doesn't work that way for a lot of people. People need it sometimes in a different way. We also understand we will gain the knowledge of what it means, Yirat Hashem. Now, we translate into English, Yirat Hashem is fear of God. Better way to translate it may be awe, A-W-E, and awe of God. But even when you translate as fear, it's not in the form of terror, but it's a healthy sense. It's reverential awe. When a person walks into, let's take a non-Jewish example for a moment. If you've ever been to the Hermitage in Russia, if you've ever been seen the Grand Canyon, if you've ever seen anything that's, well, the Grand Canyon is not man-made, that's Hashem made. Everything is, but you know what I mean. Something that causes you to go like, holy shamoly, that is just unbelievable. Where you see this, like the Grand Canyon, something just massive. You look at the beauty, you stand in the Galil or the Golan, and you just look at the vast expanse of the land of Israel, how beautiful everything is from Eilat down to, from Metula to Negev, as the song says. It's not just like, wow, that's beautiful. It should give you a sense of awe. And then when you talk about the universe, you know, you really expand it to the whole thing, and to see that we are nothing but an absolute dot of an infinitesimal dot of a speck of a nothingness in the grand scheme of God's universe, and he cares about you and me, that's also a form of yirah, of reverential awe. And we gain that as well with some of these mishalim we will see in Mishle. It's a mindset also. The mindset being that it recognizes I am not God. I don't get to make up my own definitions of good and evil, of right and wrong. We have latitude when there's a spectrum of black to white with gray in the middle where we can make these kinds of judgments. But in the grand scheme, I'm not allowed to eat pig because Hashem said so. By the way, the Rambam says you shouldn't say, oh, I don't want to eat it because God said. You should say, Efshi ve'efshi, I want it. I really do. But Hashem said not to. That's a mitzvah also, and mitzvah in quotes, to do something like that. So I need to, as Shlomo is indicating to us, I need to humble myself before Hashem and embrace Hashem's definitions of what's right and wrong, what's good and evil, even if it is a little bit inconvenient for me. Take a look at this. There is a website that, well, a website, there's a YouTube video I came across. I don't remember if it's a Jewish website or not, because Chochma b'goyim ta'amin, if you find wisdom among the non-Jewish world, you could believe it, use it. This is kind of the introduction. The first 9 chapters is what it's about. For gaining wisdom, chokhmah, skill, applied knowledge, the fear of Hashem, reverence and awe, a moral mindset, humbling oneself before God. This is kind of like a summary of what I was just saying. The short one-liners don't fill the first 10 chapters. The first 10 chapters are more or less a father, and again, this is a metaphorical sense, a father speaking to the son, how son should listen and follow wisdom, and to gain the fear of Hashem, the love of Hashem, live according to that, integrity, which leads to success and peace. Now, we don't do it because we want to live peacefully and be successful. That's a nice side benefit. The reason we serve Hashem, the reason we do the mitzvot is, as a parent, I don't like when parents say it, but because I said so, right? I'm pretty sure God knows better than me. I don't know about you, but I am sure of that. So when Hashem says not to take and do shatnez, or in this past week's parsha, and talks about shooing away the mother bird, and talks about all those other things it's talking about there, that like what? Some of the things like don't seem to have any connection to being a better person, a better Jew, whatever. But for Hashem's approach that we learn as we learn and go through it, that becomes part of how we serve Hashem. The Father warns his Son. We're going to see a lot of this of against folly, evil actions, stupidity, foolishness, bad decisions. I've always been a person who's, when I've had people working for me when I was in the business world, I learned something from one of my bosses. And at first it didn't make sense to me, but then it did. And I've discovered that I've used that in my own life many times. There are people who cannot make a decision to save their life. And it's tough. It's tough to deal with someone like that. It's tough for a child whose parent can't make a decision. But I've rather, if someone's working for me, make a decision. Let's say they couldn't get a hold of me, a decision had to be made. To make a decision, it may not be the right decision, but it's a decision. Instead of waffling back and forth and maybe losing certain opportunities, make a decision. If it's reversible, great. If it's not, we'll have to work with the consequences. I also used to have a sign in my office that said, "No excuses, just results." I don't want to hear, okay, that the bus was late and that's what happened. That's why, whatever. Just do something about it, make it right and fix it. That's part of what you're going to find in Mishle as well. Because what happens when a person is filled with these bad decisions, when they're filled with evil thoughts and folly and time wasting, it leads to ruin. It leads to shame. It leads to not serving Hashem the way Hashem wants us to. So the son, this metaphorical son, should pursue wisdom, fear Hashem. That should be one of the highest goals in life. And the fact that you're sitting in front of your computer or watching this eventually on YouTube is exactly what Shlomo HaMelech wants. This is the pursuit. This is the pursuit of Chokhmah, the pursuit of wisdom, the pursuit of serving Hashem better. You're not going to be perfect. Nobody is. It's impossible. But just wanting to and trying and learning. Let's say I'm going to make up a number. Let's say there's 1,000 parables and Mishalim and Litzot and all within Mishle. It's not. And you pick up 30 and that affects you. That's fantastic. That's great. You got to throw a wide net sometimes to gain and learning. I'll show you another slide. Again, this is from this website that kind of summarizes some books in Tanakh. The speech of the father's son. Now, there is a pasuk, Shema, you'll see, Shema b'ni musar avicha, v'al titosh Torah timecha. Not only is it a famous pasuk about not straying away from your father's instructions and your mother's Torah, but it also has halachic implications. That's like the introductory statement when the father speaks to the son. He's like saying, okay, son, sit down. We have what to talk about. I want to teach you things. We'll learn the wisdom and fear of Hashem. It must be from a non-Jewish source, because very often you'll find it of the Lord as opposed to Hashem or God. Virtue, integrity, and generosity, success and peace, folly and evil, selfishness and pride, ruin and shame. These are the flow chart. When you start with the wisdom and virtue and integrity, and you arrive at success and peace. If you start off with, just time wasting and folly and evil, leads to selfishness and pride, and ruin and shame. Okay, very nice. Nice little summary. Another thing you're going to see in the first 9 chapters are poems from what I'm going to call Lady Wisdom. We have the father and the son, and we have Lady Wisdom. We're going to see different approaches. Not everyone looks at it as, quote, Lady Wisdom speaking, but here it's wisdom being personified as a woman. Now, if you're not familiar with the poetic term, literary term, personification, the word person, it's when you give a human quality to something that's an abstract concept. So when the woman when the chokhmah is personified as wisdom, in Hebrew it's called ha'anasha, from the word enoshut, or humanity. Ha'anasha, or personification. Again, it's not when she will be speaking, again, in quotes, she's not going to be only teaching. She's going to put it in the sense of seek her out. Go after this. There's dropping these little breadcrumbs saying, come on, I have more for you. I have more for you, and I have more for you. And she's going to weave these parables and ideas and lessons into the fabric of day-to-day life, that wherever you see people making strong decisions, good decisions, and when it comes to serving Hashem, when it comes to how you relate to your fellow human being, and especially your fellow Jew, you're taking actually the wisdom directly from here, whether you realize it or not. These 2 sets of speeches, again, the father and the son and Lady Wisdom, it's not that you're just reading good advice. I've sort of said this already, but I cannot say it enough. If you go into a bookstore, you go into Steinmetzky's, or if you're in the United States, you go into what used to be Crocs, I don't know what they call it, Barnes and Noble. I'm still Crocs and Brentano in my back of my head. You go into Barnes and Noble, it's grown over the years, because I've actually gone on a way to look. The self-help section is massive now. It seems to eclipse almost every other section in size when it comes to nonfiction. This book is not to be looked at as a self-help book. While it is, and that's nice, it's not just reading good advice. What is it we're really reading? When we're reading the wisdom of Shlomo, we're reading Hashem's invitation through Shlomo and his wisdom through prior generations, and saying, Hashem's in a sense saying to us, hey, listen, my son Shlomo has some information for you. Pay attention. I once had a Rebbe in the yeshiva many years ago. I think I was in high school. I don't remember. We're sitting in the Beit Midrash. Actually, it was the Beis Medrash. And he was talking to a few of us, and he said he had a pet peeve. When you learn Gemara, very often you'll see on the side a little note. It'll say, look at this other Gemara, such and such a page. Or you're learning the Tosfot, the additional commentary on the Gemara. It'll say, look at Rashi in this other Masechta, this other book. Oh, or look up this pasuk that's part of the Gemara. 9 times out of 10, when a person's learning, they don't look it up, unless they're looking to go more into depth. Generally speaking, they read the pasuk that's part of the text in the Gemara, and they move on. They see the Tosfot, they don't go necessarily to look at the so my Rebbe said to me, he literally walked over, he said, if God came over, if Rashi came over to you and said, hey, you see what I just wrote here? You got to see what I wrote in this Masechta over here. Go to page 13b and take a look at it. If Rashi tapped you on the shoulder and told you that, of course you go and do that. This is Hashem tapping you on the shoulder through Shlomo's words. This is what we have, the mindset we have to come into with this. And it's filtered through a whole value system. Most of the Mishalim, most of the Proverbs, I'm using that term out generally. I know Sachidot, the Mishalim, and Melitzot, all kind of terms. I'm just going to use this generically. Most of the Proverbs are pretty short. And there's a reason for that. They're easy to remember. They're easy to remember. They're easy to then inculcate into your day-to-day ideas in life. They're meant to become a reference word. And that will then lead to the final 2 chapters of the book. So now you have 1 to 9, 10 through 29, and 30 and 31 may or may not be authored by Shlomo. Let me explain to you what that means. We will see a long time from now that those 2 chapters are introduced by a different name, a different man. Chapter 30 is introduced by a man named Agur, who may be Shlomo, it may not be. And he has a whole bunch of stuff there, and we'll see what that is. And the last chapter is written by a man, according to the text, Lemuel. It might be Shlomo, but if it is, why didn't he call himself? Why does he have to pop the name Lemuel? In the prior chapter, why mention Agur instead of? All these are being left open right out. And as I said before, the very last part of the last chapter is an acrostic. If you did ever notice, Eshet Chayil is Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet Hey. Is an acrostic of Eshet Chayil, the book. And what I'd like to do, starting next week, now this is just like I said, just general overview. We're going to start to look into depth. I'll read a few psukim, give you information about them. I don't want to move at a snail's pace, especially at the beginning. As we get closer towards the, quote, meat of the book, where they're really these deep mishalim or proverbs, we'll take them slower. But the first 9 chapters, I'm not going to fly through because there's so much to talk about, but we will go at a different pace than we will later in the book. I invite you, actually Shlomo HaMelech invites you to come along on this journey. It's going to be my best guess is a couple years. We shall see. You should live and be well, maybe longer. And to come along, and as you go through this and you start learning getting used to the different nomenclature and the language and the approach that Shlomo has in this book, you'll start to anticipate certain things. You'll start to see things that you had never seen before. And certain words or psukim or ideas that maybe in the past meant absolutely nothing, now are going to open up open your eyes in a whole new way. So that's my story for tonight. I wish everyone a good evening and a Shavua Tov. We'll learn 1 or 2 more classes, then we'll be taking a break for the Chagim, but try and get as much as we can before that. All right, be well, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Very
you.
Thank you.